The first alarm went off at 12 o'clock exactly. Not the shrill kind that made people panic, not the urgent scream of something already lost. This one sounded tired. In Ravenwood Middle School, alarms had a habit of doing that, buzzing instead of blaring, lingering a second too long, cutting off before anyone fully reacted. Teachers would later say the system was old. Maintenance would blame wiring. No one ever blamed the building itself. On that night, the halls were nearly empty. A custodial shift, one late counsellor finishing paperwork, a handful of students waiting for rides that never arrived on time, and the girl. She stood alone at the far end of the science wing, backpack resting at her feet, hands at her sides, perfectly still. She did not flinch when the alarm began. She did not cover her ears. She did not turn toward the exits the way everyone else did. She tilted her head. At first, it looked like she was listening. Then it became clear she was watching something no one else could see. The fire alarm lights strobed red along the ceiling, washing the hallway in pulses that stretched strangely, as if the light itself had weight. Each flash lingered longer than the last. Reflections in the glass trophy cases lagged behind the motion of the bulbs, catching up a fraction of a second too late. The counsellor noticed that part. Later, he would insist that was when things started to feel wrong. He called out to her by name. His voice echoed farther than it should have, bouncing down the hall and returning slightly altered, as if the words had been bent on the way back. She did not respond. The alarm stopped. Silence rushed in to fill the space it left behind, thick and heavy, pressing against the ears. Somewhere deep in the building, something clicked. Not a switch, not a breaker, more like a lock deciding whether or not to hold. That was when the smell appeared. Not smoke, not burning plastic or overheated wires. Heat. Pure, dry heat, like standing to, close to a furnace you cannot see. The counsellor took a step back without realizing he had moved. The air around the girl shimmered faintly, the way it does above asphalt in summer. The hallway lights dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again, struggling to decide which version of the room they belonged to. And the girl finally looked away from the wall. Her eyes were wrong, not glowing, not shining. They looked as if something behind them was burning steadily, quietly, the way coals burn long after a fire has gone out. A deep ember red, barely visible unless the light hit them just right. She did not blink. She did not scream. She spoke, softly, as if answering a question that had been asked somewhere else. "It's opening too early." The counsellor froze. Later, when interviewed, he would say the words felt familiar, like something he had already heard in a dream he could no longer remember. He would insist that when she spoke, the hallway stretched just slightly, pulling away from him, elongating the space between them until he felt absurdly far from a child standing only a few steps away. The wall behind her cracked, not with sound, with intention. A thin line appeared where there had been nothing before, running vertically from ceiling to floor, glowing faintly red, as if heat were leaking through from the other side. The lockers nearest to it warped inward, metal bending without force, as though reality itself had softened. The girl watched the fracture widen. Her eyes burned brighter. The counsellor tried to move. He would later say his legs refused him. Not paralyzed, not frozen. Simply unconvinced that movement still applied here. Somewhere in the building, glass shattered. In another wing, A security camera warped its image into a slow spiral before going black. A clock in the main office stopped ticking and never started again. Outside, the streetlights flickered out of sync, one by one, each holding darkness a second longer than the last. And still, the girl did not react. She lifted her hand, not toward the crack, but toward the space beside it. Her fingers traced the air, following invisible seams, mapping fractures no one else could see. "This one goes all the way down," she said, calm, observational, deeper than before. The heat intensified. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything snapped back. The crack sealed itself with a sound like a deep breath being released. The lockers straightened. The lights stabilized. The air cooled, rushing away as if embarrassed it had lingered so long. The girl blinked. Once. Her eyes returned to normal. She swayed just slightly and collapsed where she stood. When the fire department arrived, they found no evidence of smoke, flame, or structural damage. The alarm system showed no faults. The cameras recorded nothing usable. The counselor was treated for shock and dehydration, and the girl was taken away quietly, wrapped in a blanket that did nothing to hide, the faint warmth radiating from her skin. By morning, the incident had a name: electrical malfunction, mass suggestion, stress response. But in a locked office, far from Ravenwood, a file was opened. Not because of the fire alarm, not because of the cracked wall, but because someone reviewing the footage noticed something else. In the final frame before the camera failed, the girl was not looking at the fracture at all. She was looking past it, as if something on the other side had finally looked back. And that was the moment Ravenwood gained a witness, long before anyone called her Subject 09. Before anyone noticed the heat, before the alarms, before the files and the men who never gave their names, the world around her already felt wrong. Not broken, not dangerous, just misaligned. The girl learned this early, though she had no language for it at the time. Only sensations, only small, persistent discomforts that refused to explain themselves. Corners bothered her. She could not have said why, only that rooms felt safest when she stood away from them. Corners collected things. Sound lingered there too long. Shadows pooled unnaturally, thickening as if they were waiting for something to arrive. When she slept, she turned her bed slightly, angling it so her feet did not point directly toward the corner of her room. If asked, she would have shrugged and said it felt better that way. Adults accepted this. Ravenwood was a town built on accepting things without inspection. The house she lived in sat near the edge of town, where the streets thinned and the trees crept closer to the road each year. Fog reached that neighborhood first. It arrived earlier in the evenings and left later in the mornings, clinging to lawns and mailboxes, long after the rest of Ravenwood had returned to clarity. Her parents blamed geography. The girl noticed patterns. She noticed that the fog gathered thickest around certain houses, that it avoided others entirely, that sometimes it parted just enough for her to see the street beyond, stretched longer than it should have been, as if distance itself had grown uncertain. She never mentioned this. Some instincts are born fully formed. At school, teachers described her as quiet, but not withdrawn. She answered questions when asked. She completed her work neatly, carefully, with margins aligned and letters evenly spaced. She disliked crossing words out. Mistakes bothered her more than they should have. The page was supposed to stay the same. When it didn't, her chest tightened. During reading time, she often stopped mid-sentence, eyes drifting toward the window or the back wall, tracking movements that no one else acknowledged. Once, a teacher followed her gaze and laughed it off. "Just the lights," she said. "They flicker sometimes." The girl nodded, though she knew that wasn't true. Lights flickered on and off. These stretched. At home, she drew. Not houses, not people, not the things children were praised for reproducing. She drew layouts, overlapping shapes, streets that doubled back on themselves, buildings half erased, as if someone had started to sketch them and lost interest halfway through. Her parents worried briefly, then less so. Ravenwood had a way of smoothing over concern. When the headaches started, they were mild at first, a pressure behind the eyes, a warmth that lingered longer than discomfort should have allowed. Doctors suggested hydration, more sleep, less time staring at pages. She drank water. She slept. The warmth remained. Sometimes, late at night, she woke convinced someone was standing in her doorway. Not a presence exactly, more like an absence shaped like a person. When she focused on it directly, it vanished. When she looked slightly to the side, it returned, clearer than before. She learned to keep her eyes centered. The first time she realized the world could bend happened on an ordinary afternoon. She was walking home from school, backpack heavy. Against her shoulders, the familiar route stretching ahead of her in predictable lines. She counted cracks in the sidewalk without meaning to, letting the rhythm settle her breathing. Halfway down Maple Row, the houses shifted. Not visibly, not in a way she could point to and explain. The space between them grew wider. She stopped walking. The air felt warmer there, thicker, as if she had stepped into a pocket the sun had forgotten to cool. The sound of a lawnmower somewhere nearby faded abruptly, cut short like a tape pulled from its deck. She looked down at the pavement. The cracks no longer lined up. They never moved. They never should have changed. Her chest tightened. The warmth behind her eyes intensified, spreading outward, blooming softly like heat behind closed lids. She squeezed her eyes shut and counted her breaths the way she had taught herself. When she opened them again, Maple Row was Maple Row. The houses returned to their proper distances. Sound rushed back in, filling the silence with birds, engines, wind through leaves. The warmth receded, leaving only a dull ache behind her eyes. She walked home without telling anyone. That night, she dreamed of Ravenwood split into layers. One version clean and intact. Another beneath it collapsed inward, buildings folded like paper left in the rain. She woke with her heart racing and her eyes burning, faintly, as if she had stared too long at the sun. As the months passed, these moments multiplied. They were brief, fleeting, easy to dismiss if you did not experience them firsthand. A hallway at school appearing longer than it should have. A classroom door opening onto the wrong room for a fraction of a second before correcting itself. Reflections that hesitated, catching up only after she moved. She began avoiding mirrors, not out of fear, out of preference. The warmth behind her eyes grew stronger during these episodes. Sometimes it pulsed gently. Sometimes it flared sharply, forcing her to sit down, to breathe through the sensation until the world settled back into place. Her parents noticed the headaches worsening. Another doctor visit, another set of reassurances, stress, sensitivity, growing pains. Ravenwood was full of children who grew strangely. One afternoon, during art class, she drew something new. A vertical line, simple, clean, running from the top of the page to the bottom. She shaded around it lightly, darkening the edges as if something brighter pressed against the paper from behind. When the teacher asked what it was, the girl considered the question carefully. "A place where it comes apart," she said at last. The teacher smiled politely and moved on. The drawing stayed. That evening, the girl stood in her bedroom doorway, watching the shadows stretch as the sun dipped lower. The corner opposite her bed darkened first, collecting night ahead of schedule. She felt the warmth rise again, slow and steady. This time she did not look away. The air shimmered, faintly. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to be wrong. She reached out, stopping short of touching the space where the shimmer gathered. Her fingers tingled as if held near a flame. Somewhere deep beneath Ravenwood, something shifted. Not awake. Not yet, but aware. The girl lowered her hand and stepped back, heart steady, mind quiet. Whatever she had felt did not frighten her. Fear required uncertainty. This felt inevitable. She climbed into bed, turning her pillow so it did not face the corner, and closed her eyes. As sleep claimed her, the warmth behind her eyes lingered a moment longer than usual. And in the dark beneath the town, something began to pay attention. Not because she was afraid, but because she could see. The first time it happened in front of witnesses, no one understood what they were seeing. That was the problem. Up until then, the warmth behind her eyes had been private, manageable, something she could sit through, breathe through, wait out. It came and went, like weather she had learned to predict without knowing how. But that morning, the world did not wait for her to be ready. It was late autumn, the kind of day Ravenwood specialized in. Low clouds, pale light, air that smelled faintly of metal and wet leaves. The school day had been ordinary to the point of irritation. Spelling tests, a substitute teacher who mispronounced names, the steady hum of fluorescent lights overhead. She sat near the middle of the classroom, hands folded on her desk, eyes forward. That was when the warmth spiked, not gradually, not politely. It surged, sharp and sudden, flooding behind her eyes with a pressure that made the room tilt. She inhaled slowly, the way she always did, but the sensation did not respond. It grew hotter, brighter, as if something had been struck deep inside her skull and was now burning outward. The lights flickered. Someone laughed. "Again?" a boy muttered. "This place is ancient." The teacher glanced up, annoyed more than concerned, and tapped the side of her desk where a clipboard rested. The lights stabilized, buzzing faintly, but something about them felt stretched thin, like fabric pulled too tight. The girl did not move. Her gaze locked onto the far wall, just above the coat hooks where backpacks hung in uneven rows. At first, there was nothing there. Just paint, just cinder block. Then the line appeared, so faint it might have been imagined. A vertical seam, darker than the wall around it, as if someone had pressed a ruler against reality and drawn downward with invisible ink. Her breath caught. The warmth flared. The seam widened. Across the room, a student dropped a pencil. The sound echoed strangely, repeating itself once, twice, each repetition softer than the last, like a memory being replayed rather than a noise occurring in real time. The teacher turned fully now. "Is something wrong?" she asked, irritation giving way to uncertainty. The girl tried to answer. No sound came out. The heat behind her eyes intensified, no longer contained, no longer patient. Her vision blurred at the edges, the classroom stretching and narrowing in uneven pulses. Colours dulled, shadows deepened. The seam in the wall glowed faintly, a muted red, like the inside of a closed eyelid held up to the sun. Someone screamed. Not her. Another student pointed, finger trembling. "Her eyes," he said. "Her eyes are—" They were burning, not with flame, not with light, with heat. Those closest to her would later struggle to describe it. They used words like embers and coals and reflections of something deeper. The red was subtle, visible only when the flickering lights caught it just right, but once seen, it could not be unseen. She stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor with a sound too loud, too sharp. The seam in the wall pulsed in response, widening a fraction as if reacting to her movement. "Everyone stay calm," the teacher said, though her voice shook. "Go to the hall. Now!" No one moved. The air felt wrong, thick, heavy. Each breath came with resistance, like pushing against something unseen. The warmth behind the girl's eyes spilled outward, radiating faintly from her face. Those nearest to her stepped back instinctively, hands rising to shield themselves from a heat they could not quite feel, but sensed all the same. The girl took one step forward. The seam split, not violently, not loudly. It simply opened. The wall folded inward along the line, bending without breaking, revealing a sliver of darkness beyond that did not behave like shadow. It was too deep, too still. A wrong kind of absence pressed close to the opening, and with it came a sensation none of them had words for: recognition. The girl gasped. Her eyes burned brighter. She staggered, hands flying to her head as the heat peaked, unbearable now, a white-hot pressure that eclipsed thought. She cried out, not in fear, but in pain, and the sound warped as it travelled, stretching, thin before snapping back into place. Then everything collapsed at once. The seam sealed itself, snapping shut with a sensation like a door slamming somewhere far away. The air rushed back in. The lights stabilized. Sound returned to normal. The warmth behind her eyes vanished as abruptly as it had come. She crumpled to the floor. For a moment, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. Students screamed. The teacher shouted for help, her voice breaking. Someone ran for the office. Someone else vomited near the door. The girl lay still, eyes closed, skin flushed, breathing shallow but steady. When the nurse arrived, followed quickly by administrators, there was nothing left to see. No seam, no glow, no distortion, just a girl unconscious on the classroom floor. The official report would later describe the incident as a medical episode. A seizure, perhaps, a stress response, hallucination induced by faulty lighting and mass suggestion. But the students knew better. They whispered about it in hallways and over lunch trays, voices low and urgent, about the heat, about the wall, about the way her eyes had looked through them, not at them, as if focused on something just beyond the room. By the end of the day, the story had reached every corner of the school. By the end of the week, it had reached beyond Ravenwood. And somewhere far from the classroom where it all happened, someone listened carefully as the details were repeated. Not the fear, not the panic, but the part about the wall and the eyes, and the way the world had opened first, not because of fire, but because she was there. The morning after the incident, the classroom smelled faintly of disinfectant. Desks had been rearranged. The wall where the seam had opened was freshly repainted, the new layer of beige just a shade too clean, too smooth, as if it were meant to draw attention away from itself. The coat hooks were gone. So was the substitute teacher. No announcement was made. Ravenwood preferred quiet. Corrections. The girl did not return to school that day. Officially, she was resting at home under medical supervision. That was the phrase used when the principal called her parents, voice careful and practiced. A precaution, an abundance of care, nothing to worry about. By noon, 2 unfamiliar cars were parked outside her house. They did not have government plates. They did not need them. The men who stepped out wore plain clothes and identical expressions, neutral, attentive, already assessing. They smiled when greeted, shook hands, spoke gently. They asked about her health, her sleep, her headaches. They did not ask about the wall. Not yet. The girl watched them from the top of the stairs, half hidden behind the banister. The warmth behind her eyes stirred faintly, responding not to fear, but to proximity. Something about them pressed against the air differently, as if they occupied more space than their bodies should allow. One of them looked up. Their eyes met. He did not flinch. But he did not smile again. Later, her parents would say they felt reassured by the visit. The men had been polite, professional, concerned. They spoke about specialists, about facilities better equipped to understand unusual neurological responses. They promised answers. They promised safety. That night, the girl dreamed of hallways. Not the ones from her school, but similar enough to confuse her. Longer, straighter, lit by lights that hummed softly, never flickering, never dimming. Doors lined the walls at regular intervals, each marked with symbols instead of names. She stopped in front of one and felt the warmth surge. When she reached for the handle, she woke. Within days, appointments replaced routine. Long drives to clinics that did not appear on public maps. Waiting rooms that were too quiet, too clean, where magazines lay untouched and clocks ticked just a fraction out of rhythm. Doctors asked her to describe what she saw. She tried. They asked her to draw it instead. She did. They nodded at one another, exchanged glances they thought she did not notice, and wrote notes she was never allowed to read. The tests became stranger. Lights were adjusted. Sounds played at frequencies just below comfort. Images flashed too quickly to register consciously. She was asked to identify distortions in patterns, errors in symmetry, inconsistencies no one else could find. She never hesitated. Her accuracy unsettled them. During one session, a technician leaned too close, peering at the screen over her shoulder. The warmth behind her eyes flared sharply, and without meaning to, she turned her head. He staggered back, hand to his temple, gasping. Later, he would say he had suddenly remembered something he had never lived through. That was when the questions changed. They began asking when she first noticed the warmth, how often it occurred, whether it hurt, whether it frightened her. She told the truth. "No," she said. "It just means something's about to move." The word move appeared underlined in several reports. By the end of the month, her parents were told about a facility. Not a hospital, not a school, a research institute. They spoke about opportunity, about understanding her condition, about keeping her comfortable while experts studied what made her different. They avoided words like containment and risk and exposure. They did not avoid urgency. The girl listened from the hallway as adults discussed her future in hushed tones, voices heavy with concern and relief. She felt the warmth pulse gently, a steady reminder that decisions were being made around her, not with her. That night, she packed her bag carefully. Not clothes, not toys. She packed her drawings, the layered streets, the bending rooms, the vertical line she had drawn again and again, darkened at the edges as if heat pressed from the other side. On the morning they left, fog blanketed the street, thicker than usual, clinging to the car as though reluctant to let it go. The girl looked back at her house only once. The corner of her bedroom window shimmered faintly. She did not wave. The facility stood beyond the woods, concrete and quiet, its edges too precise for the landscape around it. No sign marked the entrance. No name greeted visitors. Inside, the air was cool and evenly lit. The warmth behind her eyes dulled but did not disappear. It lingered, watchful. A woman met them at the door, clipboard in hand, smile rehearsed. "We'll take very good care of her," she said. Behind her, down a long corridor, a door waited. Later, it would be given a number. Later, so would she. But in that moment, as the door closed softly behind her and the lock slid into place with a sound that felt permanent, the girl understood something important. The world had noticed her, and it was not looking away. Subject 09. They did not call her that at first. Names mattered, even here, especially here. They used hers in the beginning, spoken gently, carefully, as if familiarity might soften the transition. Staff members introduced themselves with first names only. Smiles were offered. Explanations were given in reassuring fragments. "This is just for observation. This is temporary. This will help us understand you." The girl listened. She always did, but she noticed what they did not say. Her room was small and deliberately unremarkable. White walls, a narrow bed bolted to the floor, a desk with rounded corners and a single chair that did not scrape when moved. No windows. The lighting came from recessed panels in the ceiling, evenly bright, never flickering. It felt wrong immediately, not dangerous, not hostile, controlled. The warmth behind her eyes dimmed but did not vanish. It pulsed faintly, as if responding to the building itself, testing its boundaries the way she tested. Corners and hallways. She sat on the edge of the bed and waited, hands folded in her lap, posture calm. Someone was always watching. She felt it before she confirmed it. The subtle pressure of attention, not from one direction, but many. When she tilted her head slightly, the warmth sharpened, and she became aware of the cameras hidden behind tinted panels. Not their locations exactly, but their focus. They were pointed at her face. The first tests were simple: light sensitivity, pattern recognition, reaction times. She was shown grids and asked to identify errors that did not exist. She found them anyway. A square that leaned a fraction too far to the left. A sequence that repeated itself one beat too early. Each time she answered, someone behind the glass inhaled sharply. They adjusted the lighting. The warmth behind her eyes responded immediately, blooming brighter, spreading like heat across her temples. The room did not change, but she felt it strain, as if the walls were being asked to hold a shape they were not meant to keep. She closed her eyes. "Tell us what you see," a voice said gently through the speaker. She hesitated, not because she was afraid, because she was deciding how much truth the room could tolerate. "The edges are soft," she said finally, "like they might fold if I touch them." Silence followed. Then the tests changed. Sounds were introduced. Low humming tones that vibrated through the floor. Sharp clicks that echoed too long. Voices played backward, forward, layered over one another until words dissolved into intention rather than meaning. With each adjustment, the warmth intensified. Her eyes began to hurt more often now. Not the dull ache she had known before, but a sharper sensation, like staring into brightness without blinking. Staff members noticed the redness first, the way her pupils dilated unevenly, the faint glow that appeared only when the lights dimmed. They recorded everything. During one session, a technician asked her to look at a mirror placed on the table in front of her. The surface was flawless, polished to an unnatural shine. Her reflection stared back calmly, posture mirroring her own. Then it lagged, just slightly. The warmth flared. She leaned closer, breath steady, eyes burning now, the heat undeniable. The reflection smiled a fraction of a second before she did. She pushed the mirror away. It shattered on the floor, not from force, from proximity. After that, mirrors were removed. The designation appeared quietly, slipped into conversation as if it had always been there. Subject 09. It was written on clipboards, spoken during handovers, used in reports she glimpsed only briefly, upside down through the reflection of glass. She did not object. Names had never mattered much to her. They were labels for things already understood. What unsettled her was not the number, but the way the building responded to it. When they said Subject 09, the warmth behind her eyes pulsed brighter, as if the words themselves carried weight, as if something else was listening. Her dreams shifted. They were no longer confined to memory or imagination. They gained depth, texture, weight. She walked through places that felt familiar but wrong, buildings that resembled Ravenwood but sagged under an unseen burden. The sky above them was the color of ash. The air tasted faintly of iron. When she woke, her sheets were warm. Staff members began to report disturbances, lights dimming unexpectedly, shadows behaving strangely in her presence, a persistent sense of being watched when standing outside her room, strongest when she slept. One night, a nurse paused outside her door, hand resting on the frame, heart racing for no clear reason. Inside, the girl lay awake, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The warmth behind her eyes burned steadily. She was no longer just noticing fractures. She was close enough to feel them breathing. And somewhere beneath the facility, beneath the town, beneath everything Ravenwood pretended was solid, something old and patient shifted its attention fully toward her. Not with hunger, with interest. They assigned her a new room after the third anomaly. No explanation was given. None was needed. The corridor changed subtly as she was led through it. Longer than before, quieter, the air cooler by a degree that made her skin prickle. Doors passed at regular intervals, identical except for the symbols etched into their frames. She noticed that the symbols were not consistent. Some leaned, some repeated strokes where there should have been none. Mistakes bothered her. The warmth behind her eyes stirred. The room they brought her to was wider than her previous one, though it did not look larger at first glance. The ceiling was higher. The walls were bare. The lighting came from a single recessed panel that hummed softly, its tone just low enough to be felt rather than heard. A table stood at the center. 2 chairs, one for her, one for whoever chose to sit. No mirror. They thought they had learned. She sat when instructed, posture calm, hands folded. The door sealed behind her with a sound too smooth to be mechanical. On the other side of the glass, figures shifted, clipboards raised, voices murmuring in patterns she had begun to recognize. Expectation, control, restraint. The warmth remained contained, a steady pulse behind her eyes, responding to the room as if testing its balance. "Tell us when you feel it change," the voice said through the speaker. She nodded. At first, nothing happened. The light held steady. The hum remained constant. The walls appeared solid, their surfaces smooth and unbroken. Minutes passed. She breathed evenly, eyes scanning without fixation, aware of the watchers without needing to look at them. Then the room leaned. Not visibly, not dramatically. It leaned the way a thought leans when it has not finished forming. The warmth flared. She inhaled sharply, fingers tightening against one another. The table shifted a fraction to the left, its legs scraping softly against the floor, though no one had touched it. The sound echoed once, twice, each repetition slightly delayed. "The corners," she said quietly. "They're moving." Behind the glass, someone leaned forward. The corners of the room softened, their angles blurring as if seen through heat haze. Shadows thickened there, gathering too early, ignoring the position of the light. The hum deepened, dropping in pitch until it vibrated through her chest. She closed her eyes. The warmth surged. When she opened them again, the walls had begun to bow inward, not collapsing, not breaking, warping. The space between her and the far wall stretched, then compressed, breathing in slow, uneven rhythms. The floor rippled faintly beneath her feet, a sensation more felt than seen, like standing on the deck of a ship in calm water. She stood without being told. The chair slid back, stopping itself before striking the wall, as if something had caught it mid-motion. The warmth behind her eyes burned brighter now, no longer subtle, radiating outward in a way that made the air shimmer. "Stop the test," someone said urgently through the speaker. She did not hear them. Her attention had fixed on a new detail. A line had appeared near the ceiling. Not a seam. Not yet. A suggestion of one. She stepped closer, hand lifting slowly, carefully, as though approaching a skittish animal. The air tingled against her skin, heat licking at her fingertips without contact. "This room doesn't like being watched," she said, voice calm despite the strain behind her eyes. "It bends when you look at it too hard." The line thickened. The walls groaned softly, a sound like distant metal cooling after heat. Somewhere beyond the glass, alarms began to chirp, their tones uneven, overlapping, unsure of their own urgency. "Subject 09, step back," the voice ordered now, no longer gentle. She hesitated, not out of defiance, out of curiosity. When her fingers came within inches of the line, the warmth peaked, white-hot and blinding. Her vision flared red at the edges, the room washing out as if overexposed. The line pulsed, responding to her proximity, and for a heartbeat she saw beyond it. A darker version of the same space, walls sagging inward, light behaving like liquid pooling along the floor. Recognition surged, then pain. She cried out, stumbling back as the room snapped violently into place. The walls straightened, the floor stilled. The line vanished as if it had never existed. The hum cut off abruptly, plunging the room into silence so complete it rang. She collapsed to her knees, gasping, hands pressed to her temples. The door opened. They rushed in then, no longer careful, no longer distant. Hands guided her up, voices overlapping, orders barked and countermanded. She was led out as the room behind her was sealed. Later, in reports, the incident would be described as a spatial instability triggered by heightened sensitivity. The language would be precise, clinical, incomplete. What the reports did not capture was the way the room had reacted to her presence, not like a structure under stress, but like a thing aware it was being touched. As she lay in her bed that night, eyes open in the dark, the warmth behind them pulsing steadily, she understood something new. The fractures were not random. They were responsive. And the closer she came, the more the world revealed how little it wanted to stay the same. They stopped calling it imagination after that. Not openly, not in writing. But the way the staff moved around her changed. Voices lowered when she passed. Eye contact broke sooner than before. The warmth behind her eyes no longer registered as a symptom to be managed, but as a signal, an early warning that something in the building was about to misbehave. They adjusted procedures. Tests were shorter now. Lights were kept steady. Sounds softened. She was given more time alone, as if isolation might blunt whatever edge she was sharpening simply by existing. It did not help. The first time she saw the hollow clearly, she was awake. Not during a test, not during a dream. It happened in the hallway outside her room, a place meant to be transitional, forgettable. The floor was polished concrete, the walls bare, the lights evenly spaced, their glow clean and white. She was being escorted back after a session when the warmth rose sharply, without warning. She stopped walking. The staff member beside her took 2 more steps before realizing she had fallen behind. He turned, irritation already forming, and opened his mouth to speak. Then he felt it too. The air thickened, pressing inward from all sides. The lights above them elongated, their reflections stretching across the floor like liquid pulled by gravity. Sound dulled, footsteps fading until even breathing seemed intrusive. The girl's eyes burned, not painfully, purposefully. She looked down the hallway, past the next set of doors, toward a point that should have been empty. It wasn't. The corridor continued, but wrong. The walls ahead sagged inward, their surfaces rippling faintly as if the material had softened. The floor dipped, sloping toward a darkness that swallowed light instead of reflecting it. Farther down, the lights flickered red, not flashing, but glowing steadily, like embers buried beneath ash. She took a step forward. The staff member reached for her arm and stopped short, hand hovering inches from her sleeve. He later said it felt like reaching toward a furnace. Not heat, exactly. Pressure. Resistance. "Don't," he whispered, though he could not have said why. She ignored him. As she crossed an invisible threshold, the warmth behind her eyes spread outward, flooding her vision. The hallway around her peeled back like a layer of skin, revealing something beneath that had always been there, waiting. The hollow. It was Ravenwood, but collapsed inward. Buildings folded in on themselves. Streets doubled back, looping without logic. Doors opened onto rooms that led nowhere. Or worse, somewhere familiar, but altered beyond comfort. The air was thick with whispers that were not voices, echoes of thoughts that had never been spoken aloud. Time felt wrong here. Not fast, not slow, unmoored. She stood at the edge of it, eyes burning steadily now, taking it in without flinching. Fear did not rise. Panic did not follow. Instead, there was recognition. This was the place she had drawn. The layered streets, the bent rooms, the vertical fractures glowing faintly red. This was what pressed against the world she knew, testing for weak points. Behind her, the staff member screamed. The sound did not travel correctly. It stretched thin, unraveling as it moved, becoming less a noise and more an impression. She did not turn to look at him. Her attention had fixed on something else. Movement. Not a figure, not yet. A shifting awareness that permeated the space, sliding along surfaces, pooling in shadows, listening without ears. The hollow responded to her gaze, its contours sharpening, its details resolving, as if brought into focus by her attention. Something noticed her noticing it. The warmth behind her eyes flared brighter, no longer painful, but intense enough to force tears she did not feel. She blinked them away and took another step. The hollow did not recoil. It leaned closer. Images flooded her mind, not as visions, but as impressions layered over reality. A town above, whole and intact. A town below, fractured and decaying. Children moving between them in sleep. Memories bleeding through walls. Shadows slipping free of their owners. At the center of it all, an absence shaped like a presence. The murmur. She did not hear it. She felt it. A pressure behind thought. A reflection of regret and memory and things left unsaid. It brushed against her awareness, testing, curious rather than hostile. Most people recoiled at this point. She did not. She met the sensation head-on, eyes burning brighter, and for the first time, the hollow hesitated. Not because it was afraid, because she was calm. The staff member collapsed behind her, overwhelmed by sensations his mind could not categorize. Alarms began to sound distantly, their tones distorted, pulled thin as they brushed against the boundary she had opened. She turned back then, finally, stepping away from the threshold. As she did, the hollow receded, folding back into itself, layers sliding into place like a puzzle reluctantly solved. The hallway returned, concrete, white walls, even lighting. The warmth faded to a low pulse. She knelt beside the staff member, checking his breathing the way she had seen nurses do. He was alive, shaking. His eyes stared at nothing. "They don't see it," he whispered hoarsely. "They don't see what you see." She nodded. "I know," she said. From that moment on, the Institute stopped pretending they were observing a condition. They were standing at the edge of a place, and the girl, Subject 09, was the only one who could look into it without losing herself. Somewhere deep beneath Ravenwood, the hollow adjusted. It had found something new. Not a door, a witness. It began quietly, not with alarms, not with fractures or bending walls, with sleep. The first report came from a nurse on the night shift, filed with visible embarrassment. She described waking in the staff quarters with the sensation that she had been somewhere else. Not dreaming exactly, walking, moving through corridors that felt familiar but wrong. She remembered red light pooling along the floor and the sound of her own footsteps echoing too long. She dismissed it as stress. The next night, a technician reported the same thing. Then 2 orderlies, then a doctor. Each account differed in detail, but the structure was the same. A place beneath the place. A version of the Institute that sagged and warped, lights glowing red instead of white. Doors that opened onto rooms that did not exist during waking hours. And always, somewhere in the distance, a girl walking ahead of them. They never saw her face. They knew it was her anyway. Subject 09 slept through it all, or so the monitors suggested. Her vitals remained stable, her breathing slow and even, no signs of distress. The warmth behind her eyes dimmed during sleep, settling into a low, steady glow that pulsed in time with something deeper than her heartbeat. But her dreams had changed. She no longer wandered alone. In sleep, she moved through the hollow with ease, steps confident, eyes burning softly, illuminating fractures before she reached them. The place responded to her presence, surfaces sharpening, pathways resolving where she looked. Shadows gathered but did not approach. Others followed. They did not mean to. They slipped in through thin places opened by her calm, drawn along by proximity rather than permission. Staff members, children in other wings, even a security guard stationed 3 floors above her room, all found themselves moving through the same distorted corridors, sharing the same wrong sky overhead. They woke with pieces missing, memories they could not place, sensations without context. One man awoke convinced he had lost something important, but could not say what. Another woke in tears, mourning a childhood he had not lived. The phrase "memory bleed" appeared in internal reports. It was underlined. Attempts were made to isolate her further. Sound-dampening panels were installed. Lighting was adjusted to mimic circadian rhythms more precisely. Sedatives were discussed, then rejected. No one wanted to dull whatever connection she represented, not when they were only just beginning to understand its scope. The dreams persisted. They intensified. Children in adjacent wings began sleepwalking, found standing, motionless in hallways, eyes open but unseeing. When guided back to bed, they murmured about red light and bending rooms, about following someone who never looked back. One boy drew a picture the next morning, a vertical line splitting a building in half. Staff confiscated the drawing immediately. Subject 09 was asked about it the following day. "Do you know why others are dreaming with you?" a researcher asked, voice careful, neutral. She considered the question. "They're close enough," she said finally, "and they're scared." The warmth behind her eyes flared faintly at the word. Fear mattered. It always had. Those who panicked in the dreams fell away quickly, waking in confusion or terror. Those who remained calm lasted longer, moving deeper, seeing more before being pushed back into waking life. No one lasted as long as she did. During one monitored sleep cycle, her eye movements spiked sharply, and for the first time, the warmth behind her eyes increased, instead of dimming. The cameras caught it clearly then, a faint red glow beneath closed lids, steady and controlled. At the same moment, 3 staff members elsewhere in the building woke screaming. They described the same thing: a pressure, a presence, something listening. They did not hear words. They felt their own thoughts reflected back at them, altered, sharpened, stripped of comfort. The murmur had begun to notice the others. That was the line no one wanted to cross. Emergency meetings were called, protocols rewritten. Discussions turned from observation to containment, from curiosity to risk. The word breach appeared more often now, paired with phrases like shared access and uncontrolled spread. Subject 09 listened to these conversations through walls that had grown thin enough for intention to pass through. "They're afraid of losing control," she said one evening, not looking up from her drawing. A nurse paused in the doorway. "What do you mean?" The girl shaded the edges of a familiar shape. Ravenwood folded inward, streets layered atop one another. "They already have," she said softly. That night, the dreams reached beyond the institute. A woman in town woke standing in her kitchen, hand pressed against a wall that felt warm to the touch. A teenager dreamed of walking beneath a red sky, following a path that led nowhere. A man woke convinced he had heard his dead brother whisper his name. Ravenwood began to sleep uneasily, and beneath it all, in the space that was not meant to be shared, The hollow adjusted once more, not expanding, not retreating, listening. Because now, through the girl with the burning eyes, it was no longer confined to one mind at a time. It was learning how to echo. They told themselves it was controlled. That was the word used in every meeting, every document, every quiet justification whispered into recorders late at night. Controlled variables, controlled exposure, controlled observation. The idea that anything here still obeyed. Control was comforting enough to survive repeated contradiction. The proposal was simple in structure and dangerous in implication. If Subject 09 was acting as a focal point, if others were entering the same altered space through proximity and sleep, then the connection might be measurable, repeatable, mapped. Echo, they called it. Not because it sounded harmless, because it described exactly what they were afraid of. The room chosen for the experiment was not new. It sat deep within the Institute, below offices and observation suites, where the concrete thickened and the air cooled naturally. The walls were reinforced, the ceiling lower than ideal. No corners sharper than necessary, no mirrors. They placed Subject 09 at the center of the room, seated, hands resting on her knees. She wore no restraints. None were needed. She had never tried to leave. The warmth behind her eyes pulsed steadily, brighter than usual, as if the building itself anticipated what was coming. "Tell us if it becomes uncomfortable," a voice said through the speaker. She nodded once. "It will," she said, "but not for me." The lights dimmed slightly, then stabilized. A low tone filled the room, almost imperceptible, tuned to a frequency that resonated with the body more than the ears. Sensors along the walls activated, their readings scrolling across screens behind the glass. At first, nothing happened. Her breathing remained slow, her posture unchanged. The warmth behind her eyes held steady, contained, watchful. Then the tone shifted, just a fraction. The warmth surged in response, flaring outward, and the room reacted immediately. The air thickened, the light elongated, stretching into soft streaks that trailed her movements, even though she remained still. She lifted her head. "They're close," she said calmly. "You shouldn't have called." Behind the glass, several staff members stiffened. "Called what?" someone asked. She did not answer. The tone deepened. The warmth behind her eyes burned brighter now, unmistakable, casting a faint red reflection against the floor beneath her. The walls began to hum, a vibration running through the concrete like a held breath. On the monitors, spatial readings spiked wildly. The room leaned, not violently, deliberately. A vertical distortion appeared near the far wall, faint at first, then sharpening into a glowing red seam. The floor beneath it dipped, as though pulled downward by unseen weight. The air around the seam shimmered, heat rippling outward in slow waves. "Terminate the sequence," a voice ordered sharply. The controls did not respond. Subject 09 stood. As she did, the seam widened, responding to her movement like a living thing recognizing attention. The warmth behind her eyes peaked, intense but steady, and for the first time, she smiled. Not with happiness, with understanding. "You wanted to see how it echoes," she said softly. "This is how." The room peeled open, not all at once, layer by layer. The reinforced wall folded inward, revealing the hollow beyond, not as a distant impression, but as a fully resolved space pressing against the Institute. Red light spilled through the opening, pooling across the floor like liquid. The low tone dissolved into overlapping whispers, fragments of thought and memory colliding without words. Behind the glass, people staggered back, hands to their heads as sensations flooded in. Memories not their own, regrets sharpened, fears reflected back at them with cruel precision. The murmur had arrived, not fully, but enough. Subject 09 took one step toward the opening and stopped. The hollow leaned closer. It did not pull her in. It waited. In that suspended moment, time stretched thin. Seconds elongated into something uncertain, fragile. She felt the presence clearly now, not as a threat, but as an awareness vast enough to contain her gaze without flinching. "You see, me," the murmur reflected back at her, not in words, but in recognition. "Yes," she replied, voice steady despite the heat burning behind her eyes. "And I won't look away." The room screamed. Metal groaned. Alarms howled, their tones warping into something almost vocal. Screens shattered behind the glass as pressure built and released in uneven waves. Several staff members collapsed where they stood, overwhelmed by the flood of reflected thought. Finally, someone found the manual cutoff. The tone died abruptly. The red light dimmed. The seam resisted for a heartbeat longer, then sealed with a sensation like something being dragged unwillingly back into place. Silence crashed down. Subject 09 staggered, knees buckling as the warmth receded sharply, leaving a deep, aching exhaustion in its wake. She was caught before she fell, hands steadying her as the room returned, grudgingly, to solidity. When the doors finally opened, the space bore no visible damage, no cracks, no warping, only heat lingering in the air and the smell of something scorched without fire. Later, the reports would call it an uncontrolled resonance event. They would underline uncontrolled twice. Experiment Echo 09 was officially terminated that night. Unofficially, it succeeded beyond expectation, because the hollow had not been summoned. It had answered, and it had learned something vital. Subject 09 was not a door that needed to be forced. She was a signal, and when she was acknowledged, the hollow listened back. The alarms did not stop. They staggered instead, overlapping tones collapsing into one another, rising and falling without rhythm, as if the system itself no longer agreed on what constituted danger. Lights flickered throughout the institute, not failing outright, but dimming unevenly, room by room, corridor by corridor. Subject 09 lay on a gurney in the aftermath, eyes closed, skin flushed with residual heat. The warmth behind her eyes had not vanished. It had settled deeper, quieter, like embers buried under ash. Around her, the institute unraveled. Doors sealed without instruction. Security feeds looped seconds of footage that no longer aligned with time. Elevators stopped between floors and refused to answer calls. Staff moved with urgency that bordered on panic, their training fraying under the weight of something none of their protocols addressed. This was not an experiment gone wrong. This was exposure. The first fracture appeared in the lower levels, far beneath the room where Echo 09 had taken place. A maintenance worker reported the floor feeling soft beneath his boots, the concrete flexing like rubber before hardening again. He laughed it off, nerves misfiring, and took another step. He never finished it. When they found him later, he was sitting against the wall, eyes unfocused, murmuring about red light and a hallway that would not end. There were no injuries, no marks, just heat radiating faintly from the floor beneath him. By nightfall, similar reports flooded in. Walls that bowed inward, corridors that doubled back on themselves, rooms that opened onto spaces not listed on any blueprint. The hollow was no longer confined to thresholds. It was pressing upward. Subject 09 woke just after midnight. Her eyes opened calmly, the warmth flaring briefly as awareness returned. She sat up without assistance, gaze drifting toward the ceiling as if listening to something far away. "They're tearing it," she said quietly. A nurse froze. "Tearing what?" "The distance," the girl replied. "They're scared now. That makes it louder." Attempts were made to sedate her. They failed, not because her body resisted, but because the environment did. Equipment malfunctioned. Monitors glitched. The moment the needle approached her skin, the warmth spiked and the lights above flickered violently, forcing the attempt to be abandoned. By the time administrators gathered for an emergency meeting, the institute was already compromised. Someone said the word breach aloud. It hung in the air, heavy and final. Containment protocols were activated. Sections of the facility were sealed. Personnel were ordered to evacuate from lower levels. Records were hurriedly archived, duplicated, then destroyed when duplication proved unreliable. Subject 09 was escorted through hallways that no longer matched themselves. She walked calmly between two guards whose hands shook visibly. The warmth behind her eyes burned steadily now, illuminating fractures before they fully formed. Where she stepped, the floor held. Where others followed, it sagged. "You should let me go," she said gently, not looking at them. They did not answer. They did not stop. As they descended toward the exit, the hollow broke through openly for the first time. A wall ahead of them peeled inward without warning, folding like softened metal, revealing a red-lit corridor beyond that pulsed with wrongness. The air rushed toward it, carrying whispers that were not sound, but intention. One of the guards screamed. The other dropped to his knees, hands clamped over his ears. Subject 09 stepped forward. The warmth flared blindingly bright. The hollow stilled, not retreating, not advancing, waiting. She turned back, meeting the gaze of the trembling guard still standing. "They can't close it now," she said, "but they can stop making it worse." She took one step into the red-lit space, then another. No one stopped her. The institute shuddered as if exhaling after holding its breath too long. The fracture widened just enough to allow her through, then sealed behind her with a sensation like skin knitting itself back together. Silence fell. The alarms died one by one. The lights stabilized. The hollow withdrew. Not fully, not permanently, but enough to allow evacuation to continue. By dawn, Black Veil Institute was empty, officially. Records would later state that a containment failure had rendered the facility unsafe, that all staff were accounted for, that no subjects remained inside. Unofficially, one designation was left unresolved. Subject 09, status unknown. In Ravenwood above, the town slept uneasily, unaware that something fundamental had shifted beneath it. And far below, in the space where the institute no longer existed as it once had, the girl with the burning eyes walked deeper into the hollow. Not dragged, not lost, but choosing. Because the breach had not taken her by surprise. She had seen it coming long before anyone else believed it was possible. The hollow did not feel like falling. There was no sensation of descent, no rush of air or sudden loss of balance. One moment, Subject 09 stood at the threshold where the institute ended, and the next she was elsewhere, the world rearranged around her with quiet finality. The ground beneath her feet was solid, though it looked as if it should not be. Asphalt sagged and cracked without breaking, frozen mid-collapse. Buildings leaned into one another like exhausted bodies, their upper floors fused together at impossible angles. Windows reflected nothing consistently, sometimes showing streets that were not there, sometimes showing her from a moment ago, still standing at the breach. The light was wrong. There was no sun, no clear source, only a diffuse red glow that seemed to seep from the sky itself, staining everything it touched. It did not flicker, it did not pulse, it waited. The warmth behind her eyes settled into a steady burn, brighter than it had ever been, yet strangely comfortable. Here, it did not feel like a warning. It felt like alignment. She took a step forward. The hollow responded, not by shifting beneath her, but by clarifying. The street ahead sharpened, its edges resolving where her attention landed. Cracks in the pavement aligned themselves into readable paths. Shadows withdrew slightly, no longer pooling unpredictably. She realized then what this place required. Not fear, not force, attention. She walked. Time did not pass normally. She could not have said how long she moved through the hollow, only that movement itself felt meaningful here, as if distance mattered less than intention. Streets looped back on themselves until she stopped expecting them to behave. Doors appeared where she needed them, not where they made sense. Memory drifted through the air like dust. She passed a diner with its sign half melted into unreadable shapes, and knew, without having been told, that it had burned down in the waking world decades ago. She walked through a school hallway where lockers stood open, each one containing moments instead of books. Laughter, fear, regret, pressed flat and waiting. The hollow was not empty. It was full, not of people, of what people left behind. She began to sense the murmur more clearly now, not as a presence behind her, not stalking or looming, but everywhere at once, threaded through the environment like static beneath a signal. It did not speak. It reflected. When she thought of Ravenwood above, the hollow showed her a fractured version of it, streets sagging, power lines dipping into fog. When she remembered her parents, she felt the echo of their fear ripple outward, not her own, but theirs, refracted back at her through the space. She understood then how it fed, not on suffering alone, on what suffering created, unfinished thoughts, unspoken regrets, memories that never found rest. Most who came here arrived carrying fear like an open wound. She did not. She moved calmly, eyes burning steadily, and the hollow adjusted around that calm, uncertain how to respond to it. At the center of a wide intersection where 4 broken streets met, she stopped. Something waited there, not a shape, not a figure, an awareness denser than the rest, gathering itself where the hollow bent inward most sharply. The red light deepened, thickening until it felt almost warm. Against her skin, the murmur. It did not announce itself. It did not need to. Her thoughts brushed against it, and for a moment the world stilled. "You are not afraid," it reflected back at her, not as words, but as certainty turned inside out. "No," she said aloud, voice steady in the distorted air. "I'm not." That surprised it. Fear made doors, pain made cracks, but calm did something else entirely. "You see what is broken," the murmur returned. "You see it without turning away." "Yes," she said again. "That's why I'm here." The hollow pulsed gently, as if breathing. Around them the city shifted, buildings sagging and straightening in slow waves, responding to the exchange. Most children marked by the hollow were claimed quickly, pulled deeper, fragmented, used. She was not claimed. She was acknowledged. The murmur tested her then, reflecting fragments of thought back at her, images of the breach, of screaming halls, of walls folding inward. It pushed memories at her, not her own, but those of others who had passed through. Terror, confusion, loss. She absorbed them without flinching. They did not define her. They informed her. The murmur withdrew slightly, adjusting its attention, not rejecting her, recalibrating. You are not a doorway, it reflected. You are a measure. She felt the truth of it settle into place. She was not meant to open the hollow. She was meant to see where it would open next. Around her, the red-lit city stretched on, endless and incomplete. She sensed other thin places branching outward, leading upward toward the waking world, toward Ravenwood, toward children who would soon begin to notice warmth behind their eyes, corners that felt wrong, dreams that bent. She turned slowly, mapping those fractures instinctively. When she walked again, the hollow parted before her, not yielding, but accommodating. Somewhere above, in a town that still believed itself intact, people slept and dreamed of things they could not name. And beneath it all, inside the place that mirrored their world's collapse, the girl with the burning eyes continued forward, not as a prisoner, not as a savior, but as the only one who could stand inside the hollow and understand what it was becoming. Ravenwood noticed her before it remembered her. That was how it always happened with things that did not fit cleanly back into place. The first sighting came from a man driving home, late along Pine Lantern Road. He slowed near the tree line, headlights cutting through fog that had thickened without warning. For a moment, the beams caught on a figure standing just beyond the road's edge. A girl, older than a child, younger than memory allowed. She did not step forward. She did not wave for help. She only stood there, head tilted slightly, as if listening to something beneath the ground. The man blinked. The fog shifted. She was gone. He told no one that night. By morning, he had convinced himself it was exhaustion, the way shadows sometimes formed people if you stared too long. But the sightings continued. A woman walking her dog near the old water tower reported seeing someone reflected in the tower's rusted surface, standing behind her when no one was there. A teenager swore he saw a girl watching him from the end of a school hallway after hours, eyes glowing faintly red before the lights flickered out. Always the same details: stillness, silence, eyes that seemed to burn only when the light caught them just right. No one ever saw her approach. No one ever saw her leave. Children noticed her first. They were the ones who woke from dreams already standing, feet cold against bedroom floors, hearts calm in a way that frightened their parents later. They spoke about walking through streets that bent, about red light and quiet corridors. When asked who they followed, they hesitated. A girl, they said eventually. She didn't talk much. Parents brought them to doctors. Doctors blamed stress. Stress blamed imagination. Ravenwood resumed its habit of not looking too closely. The girl never entered homes, never crossed thresholds without invitation. She stayed at edges, tree lines, empty lots, places where buildings ended and something else began. Those who saw her up close described an unsettling absence of urgency about her, as if time applied differently when she was near. She looked finished, not damaged, not lost. Completed in a way that made others feel unfinished by comparison. The warmth behind her eyes had not faded. It had softened, diffused, spreading outward rather than burning inward. When she looked at people, some felt comfort, others felt exposed. A few felt a sudden, crushing sadness they could not explain. Those were the ones she lingered near longest. She did not intervene when accidents happened, did not warn anyone explicitly. But sometimes someone would change direction at the last moment, miss a turn, decide not to go somewhere they had planned to be. They never knew why. In the weeks that followed her return, strange things began happening more often. Streetlights stayed on during outages. Mirrors reflected people who were not yet there. Children spoke about places beneath the town as if describing rooms they had visited. And always, beneath it all, the sense that Ravenwood was being watched, not aggressively, not hungrily, but attentively. Those with a long memory began to connect pieces. A counsellor remembered a girl taken away years ago. A teacher recalled drawings confiscated and forgotten. A nurse, now retired, woke one night with the certainty that someone had finally finished a walk they started long ago. The names surfaced quietly, passed between people who did not fully trust it. The burning eyes. She heard it once, spoken softly behind her as she stood near the edge of the whispering woods. She did not turn. Names no longer belonged to her. At night, she walked alone through Ravenwood, mapping, fractures invisible to everyone else. The hollow pressed close here, thinner now, closer to the surface than it had ever been. She could feel where it wanted to open, where fear and memory and regret had weakened the space between. She marked those places silently, not with warnings, with presence. Children dreamed of her less often now, but when they did, the dreams ended gently, easing them back into waking life before fear could take hold. Adults felt watched, but not invaded. The murmur echoed faintly beneath it all, restrained, curious, recalibrating itself around her continued calm. She had changed the balance, not by force, by existing where others could not. One evening, as fog rolled thick through the streets, she stood at the edge of the sinkhole behind the woods, staring down into darkness that glowed faintly red at its deepest point. The hollow breathed beneath her feet. She did not step forward. She waited, because she knew now what she was. Not a warning, not a consequence, but proof. Proof that the hollow could be seen without surrender. Proof that fear was not the only way in. Proof that something could come back and not belong to either side anymore. And somewhere in Ravenwood, a child sat up in bed, eyes warm but not burning, and felt the world hold steady for one more night. Because the girl who came back wrong was still watching. There was a question Ravenwood never asked out loud. It lingered in the spaces between conversations, in the pauses that followed strange events, in the way people avoided certain roads without agreeing to do so. It lived in the careful phrasing of reports and the half-finished thoughts that surfaced just before sleep. What was she meant to do? The girl with the burning eyes never answered it for them, because the question itself was wrong. She did not stop the fractures. She did not seal the hollow. She did not confront the murmur or force it back into whatever shape it had once held. She observed, and that, she had learned, was enough. From the hollow she had brought back understanding rather than power, a sense of where the world thinned, where memory pressed too hard against reality, where fear softened the boundaries just enough to allow something else through. She felt these places instinctively now, the way others felt weather change in their bones. Ravenwood was full of them. The school hallway that always felt longer at night. The diner booth no one liked to sit in anymore. The stretch of road where radios lost signal and never quite found it again. She walked these places without ceremony, without urgency. When she stood still, the hollow quieted beneath her feet, its restless pressure easing as if reassured by her presence. Not because she commanded it, because she understood it. The murmur remained. It always would. It watched through reflections and regrets, listening to thoughts people pretended not to have. It tested boundaries, searching for fear sharp enough to cut through the world's surface. But where the girl stood, it did not advance. Not out of obedience, out of caution. She had shown it something unexpected, that attention without fear could change the shape of things, that observation could interrupt momentum, that a witness altered what was witnessed simply by remaining present. The murmurs adjusted itself around her like water around a stone. Some nights she felt it close, brushing the edges of her awareness, reflecting questions back at her without words. Why do you not act? She never answered aloud, because she had seen what action driven by fear created. She had watched the Institute tear itself apart, trying to control what it did not understand. She had seen children pulled too quickly into places they were not ready to face. Intervention broke things. Witnessing revealed them. She chose the slower work. Ravenwood changed subtly under her watch. Not safer, not whole, but steadier. The fractures still formed, but they opened where she expected them, not where panic forced them. Children still dreamed, but they woke before the dreams turned cruel. Reflections drifted, but they returned to their owners without splintering. The cost was quiet. Isolation that no longer hurt, but never left. A life lived at edges rather than centers. A future that did not belong fully to either side of the world. She accepted it, because she had seen what happened to those who tried to belong completely. On the anniversary of the breach, though no one marked the date openly, she stood beneath the old water tower and looked out across the town. Lights flickered in familiar patterns. Fog curled low along the streets. The hollow stirred faintly below, restless but contained. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed. The sound echoed once, then settled into place. She closed her eyes briefly, the warmth behind them glowing softly, no longer burning, no longer warning. Balanced. Far beneath Ravenwood, the hollow waited. Above it, the town endured. And between the two, unseen but constant, stood the girl who would never be claimed. Not a weapon, not a savior. The one who watched when the world bent. The one who remembered where it would break. The one who proved that seeing was not the same as surrender. And as long as she remained, Ravenwood would not fall all at once. It would fracture slowly, predictably, and someone would always be there to notice first.